Right, are we good to go? Yeah. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Big Deal, Perspectives on All-Inclusive Models. My name is David Fisher, and I'm the VP of Library Sales for the Americas and Global Sales Partnerships for Wiley. And today's panel of experts, I'm sure, is very well known to many of you. To my immediate right is Wendy Ellen Shelburne. Wendy is the Electronic Resources Librarian and an Associate Professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Next to Wendy is Grace Mary Smulowitz. Grace Mary is the Head of Collection Services and Resources Sharing for Rutgers University's Libraries. And next to Grace Mary is Corey Halachik. Corey is the Head of Acquisitions and Continuing Resources for the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. He's also co-founder and co-director of The Collective, a professional library gathering founded in 2015, dedicated to reinventing the library conference landscape. We'll be doing this live right now, won't we? And finally, at the far end, Jason Price. Jason is the Director of Licensing Operations for SCELC, the statewide California Electronic Library Consortium. Jason holds a doctorate in plant evolutionary ecology from Indiana University Bloomington, where he gained in-depth experience as a teacher and a researcher. His role at SCELC provides opportunities to work with libraries, content and software providers, and other consortia to improve library products and to expand resource access. So, today's format. We've generated 4 or 5 questions which we hope will draw out the key perspectives on the model. We probably won't have enough time for each panelist to talk to each question, so we've agreed beforehand who would take a shot at each question. We also want to ensure we leave enough time for you guys out there to ask us questions and perhaps sort of chip in with your thoughts and experiences. Before we kick off, I'd like to ensure that everyone here is all talking about the same model. So here's our working definition. So for the purposes of this panel discussion, we're defining the all-inclusive model as one that provides access to and includes all subscription-based journals on a publisher's platform, including all transfer in, all take-on titles, all new titles, and all titles that may be excluded from other traditional license models. All this for a single negotiated fee with an agreed annual price increase. Over the period of the license, new and takeover or transfer in titles are automatically added in without additional charge. Okay? And I'm going to pass that down to Jason before we go. So let's get started with the first question. So I'd like to start with Jason and Corey on this one. Why were you interested in the all-inclusive model? What were the factors that you took into account when you decided or recommended your institution move to this model? And were those factors borne out by your experience?
Sure, so I won the coin toss. I'm going to go first here on this one. So at the University of Tennessee, we had a very unique kind of situation occur where we lost 2 librarians in the acquisitions and continuing resources department. So at that point, it was just me trying to manage all of our journal packages. And as you can imagine, that can be quite difficult with transfer titles coming in and out of the time and trying to keep both the institution honest as well as the publishers honest. So when this came along, it looked like a good idea to take a lot of that workload and kind of shift it to a model that would make our workflows and processes be easier. And then in addition to that, we were able to negotiate a really competitive price. And looking at the title requests that we were getting from faculty and then also subject liaisons, a lot of those titles were kind of falling into the Wiley wheelhouse. So it just made a lot of sense, both internally from an operational standpoint as well as a content standpoint.
Okay, so I'm representing a consortium. We have about 50 participants in the Wiley database model at this point, and a lot of my responses are based on a survey that about 40 of them responded to. So To start with, in terms of what we were taking into account and what we were looking for, number one was more predictable annual price increases. Not having to deal with changes in prices due to transfer titles does help with that a lot. The second was to pursue lower annual price increases. We believed that moving to the all-inclusive, or sometimes I'll colloquially refer to it as the database model, would reduce the overall annual price increase for our libraries. The third was an easier renewal process. And that's a big deal as well, because we felt we spent a lot of time reconciling titles when that didn't actually affect rights to those titles, because everyone already had access to all of the content, minus some titles that weren't included, but the content we were working with, everyone had access to all of it. And yet we were still reconciling past subscription histories in order to maintain the older model. So looking to get past that work, which slowed things down and was difficult, was a big part of it as well. And then maybe the fourth thing was broader access. There were a set of titles that were not included, at least with Wiley in our traditional model beforehand. And then when we moved into the database model, those titles were added, so we didn't have to worry about some titles being accessible and some not being accessible. So I've got quick slides for sort of the first two major things, the more predictable annual price increases. So here you can see each of about, I think it's about 20 libraries that, actually no, it's, let's see, 30 libraries that had this, that were participants in the Wiley package for 4 years before we switched to the database model, and then in a bit I'll show you the next 3 years after that. So this is limited to just those who were there the whole time. Each line represents an individual library, and as you can see, the price changes over time accumulate to mean that different libraries were spending different amounts more. They had different price increases, right? The black dotted line there is sort of a fixed annual increase for reference. So before, there was a lot of variation. And what I've done here is put all the libraries as if they started at $10,000 and then used their annual percentage increases to put them in the same graph. So after the database model, you can see that basically, because there's a fixed price increase, it'll be a lot more predictable on that right-hand side of the graph. So did we get more predictability? Absolutely. A second one was pursuing a lower annual price increase. So this is a bit complex, but just to cover it briefly, what I can say is that 3 out of 5 participants, or 18 out of the 30, had higher annual price increases overall before the model, and about 12 had higher annual increases after the model. So for the majority of libraries, there is a slightly lower increase. And these, the multipliers here just show after a cumulative 3 years, how different are they from what the standard increase was after the model. So those two things seem to be borne out, although I can say for sure that the more predictable pricing is more strongly the case, and there's a little variation in whether the prices actually went down, or the price increases were decreased.
Our next question, and I'd like Wendy and Grace Mary to address this. What benefits, but also what challenges have you seen from using the model?
Well, one of the benefits that we've seen is, first of all, that our faculty, and particularly in the sciences, are very, very happy because it functions like as a database, and they can search across multiple journals and get significant results. So that is really a benefit to us. The other is that from an administrative perspective, as Jason said, it's easier to administer. But on the challenging side, the flexibility of cancellations and swapping titles, but there are no titles to swap in, but the flexibility is a little less, all right. But the other benefits and challenges of that are, let me just scroll down here, 1 second. It's also easier to gather counter statistics because each file contains the same fields and formats for all of the titles published by the same publisher. So it's actually easier. But on the other hand, so there's always a give and take, the cost per use is consistent. The only way to calculate it is that it's consistent across the board for every title. All right, we don't have the value of the individual title to know the true cost per use for that title. But other than that, we have gotten tremendous feedback for the benefits, so they certainly outweigh the challenges.
I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of what she just said because, of course, my people would like that too. Since 2003, we have been in whatever iteration of Wiley's deal was Wiley's deal, and the same of Blackwell, so we've just sort of rode the train as it went along. My selectors love that they don't have to think about this deal. They're just like, oh, it's Wiley, I get it. Oh, there's a new Wiley journal. Oh, great, I don't have to think about it. But over the years in doing this deal and some others across the board, I'm becoming really interested in what it means that journals don't have prices anymore. So when you do something like this and it's a lump sum, journals don't have prices anymore, which may not seem like that big of a deal, but we didn't rearrange our money when we went into this deal. So basically what happens is each fund is paying a percentage of the whole. So our engineering fund pays X on this, our biology fund pays Y on it, and we just carry forward, except there's this complicated feature called takeovers and leavers. So depending on where that journal sat in this deal, if it was part of our base and we were already buying it, FEMS microbiology, for a second, I've got another publisher over there I'm eyeballing right now because this was real and it happened. FEMS left this, which meant when I was dealing with the invoice, I had to take out what that fund was paying out of the Wiley invoice to save it so that selector could buy it from the new publisher. Or, maybe we have to buy that one off, maybe it goes into another deal. So long term, I'm kind of messing with our journal spend with some people because I have to save that money out if they want to keep it. Or conversely, we lose content because it was part of the add-on that we weren't buying as the base. So we got it, yay, hurrah. But then it leaves, and I have to say, yo, selector, you're losing this. Do you want it? Yo, we're not going to have this next year if you don't order it. Then they don't order it. Then they're mad at me when it doesn't work. So trying to hang on to those is hard. I also can't answer, many times our people want to do reports on, oh, how many journals am I buying from this publisher for this much money? And I have to say, as many as you want to say are your subject area for the dollar that you're spending. So I really want to do some research on this because I'm just kind of wondering what we might all be accidentally doing to all of ourselves when something really doesn't have a price anymore, or it didn't and then you have to put one on it. So I think that's been the aha thing in doing this. But otherwise, it's totally fine.
I can add something to that.
Sorry, Jason, anything you want to add to?
I could. I'll just echo that the most common answer for benefits from our group was that it's easier to manage. The vast majority of libraries, that was they had to pick one thing that was better about the database model. It was that it's easier to manage. And the number one challenge was less flexibility. So not being able to adjust and deal with those things, as Wendy was describing, and various other ways in which flexibility might be in effect, ability to cancel titles, those sorts of things. When that's gone, you miss it. So that was the top answers for benefits and challenges from the consortium.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one thing, just to add on to what you said. At Rutgers, we actually have taken every package and divided it and given each title in each package a purchase order. It's an internal function, and the cost of that title, and within the purchase order, the fund code tells what discipline. And we sold this with enormous spreadsheets by saying you can look at your fund code and know what title in every package applies to your fund code. And you can also look at a package and know every title that's in that package, right? So it worked in many ways. And then we used that also to extend that out to cost per use. So the database model just makes it a little more challenging for us to handle it that way, but we're working on it because it is important data across the board. How we support curriculums, et cetera, is based on the millions of dollars we spent on packages.
And then I would echo everything that was said up here, but also one other thing in terms of challenges that we had, and maybe this is just unique to us, but in the very beginning, a lot of our subject selectors and liaisons didn't really understand the model, and I don't know that we communicated it out the best way. So if you're thinking about doing this, making sure that they understand, that they are in fact getting everything will save you, some trouble down the road, and as they continue to put in requests for things that they already have access to.
So we also thought it might be interesting to get the perspective from different sizes of institutions who have experienced the model. So a large multidisciplinary research-intensive school versus a much smaller institution. So it'd be good to get the perspective, obviously from Wendy, Grace Mary as representative of large multidisciplinary schools, but also Jason, your consortium has a very long list of much smaller institutions. So who wants to kick us off? Should we go large first?
Who's bigger, you or me? 47,000 FTE.
Oh, 65,000. I hope no one we negotiate with knows that number, though. But anyway, well, I mean, one obvious answer is something I said earlier. I mean, we never were able to subscribe to everything, and so this proposal and the pricing was very favorable for us to get everything, and we are getting just delightful feedback on that. And we're, an enormous school that has many majors and graduate degrees and PhD degrees, and it's just research intensive. And so to have all of this and to be able to search it differently than looking at individual titles is really beneficial for a large institution. Yeah. You want to go? 45.
Not as large institution. But the thing about being a large school is I think it just affects your temperament as a school, and you always move as a large school, which I think means that you're accustomed to certain things, and that is deals like this. So all of our people are very accustomed to this sort of enchilada approach. Like we're unlikely to do almost anything a la carte. So this fits with our behavior very well. As our budgets get tighter, long term, I'm not sure how it's going to work out for us when suddenly we don't have any more low-hanging journal fruit to get rid of. But it is sort of the temperament of everybody, and all of our selectors collaborate kind of well on an agreement like this because it's unclear to them how they are collaborating on this deal because they're all paying into it since we haven't moved the money, as opposed to whenever something like this is new and we try to sell it, it's a little hard when you've got 50 different people and 800 different funds, and they're going, well, how much do I have to put into it? And I don't want to pay for part of that. But the longer you do this sort of element of it kind of goes away.
Okay, so SCELC has only a few institutions among its membership of about 112 members above 10,000 FTE. So we're switching, even our large are smaller than their large. But if you, one thing I can do to start with, just sort of look at price, and then we'll get into differences in opinions about the model, is if you take this graph that's sorted by the amount of the increase, and then you sort it by the size of the institution, with the largest institutions at the top and the smallest institutions at the bottom, you can see that there's not a strong trend for the price differences and the price improvement or slight increase to be associated with the size of the institutions. You might see a bit of a trend where maybe the mid-sized schools have a slightly higher cumulative increase over 3 years, and there are a couple of small institutions that seem to have greater variation. But in general, there's not an obvious effect. Larger institutions did, had better savings than smaller institutions or anything like that in the switchover. So let's see, actually. Then the other thing I've got is basically we asked 10 or 11 questions in this survey, and what I'm going to do is highlight the ones where the responses were actually different between large and small institutions. So if you take all of the 40 respondents, split them about in half, we had about 15 large, we had about 23 small, and so if you're hearing a difference, it's saying that the large ones had a noticeably different response than the small ones, and there was just 3 questions out of the survey that suggested that. So in many ways, there's not a distinguishable effect on size on the opinion. But where there was, smaller institutions were somewhat more willing to sacrifice predictability to get a lower price. So when we asked how important is predictability to you, the larger institutions said more predictability is really important to us. The second difference was that smaller institutions were less likely to be concerned about needing to subscribe to titles leaving the package, right? So if you're in a database model and the titles move out and the money doesn't move out with those titles and they go somewhere else and you need to resubscribe, that's a bigger concern for larger institutions, which tend to have more comprehensive coverage, so that one kind of makes sense. And then the third is that smaller institutions were slightly less likely to prefer the traditional model over the database model. So putting that another way, they preferred the database, smaller institutions preferred the database model slightly more than larger institutions.
Okay. So it'd be interesting to hear from the panel whether all-inclusive offers impacts your thinking about dealing with other vendors or publishers who don't offer this model, and has anything sort of changed in the way that you've been interacting? So I'll throw this one at Corey to start with. Oh, sorry. It'd be interesting to hear whether the panel thinking about dealing with other publishers who don't offer an all-inclusive or a database model, whether this has impacted their thinking about dealing with those vendors.
So it's definitely impacted my thinking about dealing with them. In a perfect world, I think I would love to see everybody offer this model at pricing that makes sense. And the reason I think that would be helpful from a workflow standpoint, I'm not worrying about reconciling. We're going to have that access from somebody. The pricing is going to make sense. And then also, if we're doing that, I can probably pull a little bit more away from subscription agents, which I think they do a good job for kind of the model and the landscape we have. But if this were, the future, and it was working that way, it would be nice to not have to have that middleman, that third party, involved in the process as well. So I guess, that's kind of the big thing. And then just, trying to have these conversations. Obviously, not every publisher is comfortable, looking at models like this. They kind of like the models they have, and just trying to have conversations to be more open and getting more access for, competitive pricing.
No, I was just going to say that I'm not sure how it impacts how we think of other publishers and how it would impact our relationship with other publishers, because publishers all have different profiles and different ways, and our needs from different publishers vary. So whether, and we also like the opportunity, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but where we don't have a tied-in package, and we can use that if we have to find money for cancellations. So, I mean, we're in very tight budget in New Jersey. We've had 6 years of a flat budget, and we're starting to climb out of that. And we have used very expensive publishers to cancel because we have no package there. We're not committed to the entirety. So I know that doesn't bode well for the publishers, but it's true. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, so it has changed our perspective quite a bit, I think. We have been working with a publisher that provided this model since, I think we moved to it in 2008. So it has been around for a while, but was not widely adopted. But as it becomes available from more publishers, we try to move in that direction. As big deals go, I would say that the all-inclusive database models are better for our libraries. We're hearing that from them. We see the advantage to them of doing this. And so we are doing our best to negotiate deals that will move in that direction whenever we can. But we also still choose to deal with publishers that don't offer this model. One, because they have a monopoly on specific content, and that's content that we want to have available, but also because we recognize that the economics of the model are much more feasible for some publishers than for others, depending on the size of the publisher, depending on the extent to which the publisher wants to grow, right? So when you stop moving money in and out based on growth, then if you want to grow a lot, you still need to be able to afford to pay those journals that you're bringing in. And if the model does not support that, then you're prevented from growing as a publisher. So we understand that not everyone can adopt this model, but we do try to find ways to make it work for both them and us. I guess the last thing I'd say is that it's changed our perspective in working with different publishers a bit, because we do struggle with traditional model publishers who still expect the subscription-based history income to shift from out of a database model into their traditional model. And it's understandable why they would need to do that, but when they make a bid to acquire a journal and they're expecting to do that based on income that they expect to get from the consortium, if that money moves and we say, but wait, there's no money to move, we have a problem. So we've spent a lot of time recently working with titles that go from the database model to a publisher who has a deal that is a traditional one. And that's challenging.
I don't know that I have anything incredibly smart to say about this. Well, I mean, all of you are in a library. Like at a certain point, you have to buy what you buy, if you have to have it. Period. We, in the last couple of years, have started canceling in a way that we haven't canceled before. So there has been at least one publisher who we were buying all of it, and they were basically going to more than double the price. And so we said, well, thank you very much. This is all we're going to buy of it. And this is the first time in my time here we've ever done anything like that. We're saying no to a lot of new starts. Something, I guess, that hasn't been said about the way that this works, and I may be misspeaking of Wiley now, and he can slap me if I'm saying something wrong. Right. You're close, you can get me. There's something to be said right now of not wildly overgrowing your journal program. And I am unclear that the world is definitely in need of 50 new journals from every publisher every year, or 2 new journals or whatever. There's something that's getting wildly irresponsible about that. And this, I haven't, in the years that we've been in this, I haven't seen this kind of thing of, oh, and then, you know, now there's 30 new Wiley journals, and then there's 50 takeovers, and then, you know, just all of this. But I don't think any of us are in an economic climate, you know, hello, almost junk bond status sitting here. Our state didn't pass the budget for 3 years. So regardless of this model, you know, we're all going to have to come to some sort of grip in the next 3 years about some things, is probably what I would say.
Well, actually, thank you. That, I mean, that takes us right into to our final question, really, which is fast forward 4 years. What models are the norms? Where do you see your collection preferences being? So I'm going to open that.
Oh.
Ready to go?
Okay, sure.
Right.
So part of the question was, would this be the norm, I think? And I mean, I don't know if it would be the norm, and I will reiterate exactly what Wendy just said. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, wow. I will reiterate that, you know, I mean, I don't know if it's sustainable. I don't know if all of these big packages are sustainable as they are. It was very inviting, and from a administrative perspective, it's easier. But I don't know if we should make judgments based on administrative perspectives, though. I think we have to make judgment on what we need. And right now, we're hearing wonderful things from our faculty about what's included, so everything is good. But I know that if push comes to shove and something else, like we have two medical schools have merged into Rutgers, and we have a new budget model called RCM, which means that everybody knows what everybody's paying for. And they don't like what they see, the number they see of how much it costs for medical material. However, they want us to buy up to date, which you all know is hundreds, thousands of dollars. Yeah, so really the push is everywhere. And that's why I don't know if we can foresee what will happen in 3 years. It's in every discipline we're being pushed to buy more. So.
I can grab this one.
Oh yeah, you have one.
So again, looking at my crystal ball, I don't know that this is going to be the norm in 3 years. I think what concerns me, in addition to kind of these other issues, so at least at UT anyways, our budget is extremely healthy, so we're very fortunate. So from and we've seen, increases every year, albeit smaller increases, but it's still a really healthy budget. So we're not as concerned from that point of view. However, content-wise, when I think about things like Sci-Hub, and access being available that way, whether or not certain people officially or unofficially endorse that, I think there is a movement, both in academia and then also in some circles within librarianship, that we're kind of willing to look the other way with that and just kind of be like, okay, well, they can get that information there. And I'm curious to see how that's going to affect our purchasing going forward, and how serious we're going to be about actually being, in my opinion, more ethical and working with our vendor publishers and partnerships that way, or if we're just going to just say this is the new norm and just kind of see where that takes us, and then as a result start to decrease our collections until something else happens or there's a major shift.
So yeah, and I'd build on that and say, even setting Sci-Hub aside, which we know that some people do, not everyone uses it, there at this point is 50% of the current literature, and that's from top publishers, is freely available through Google Scholar. So given that 50% there is a tipping point at some point between that and open access. And that, I think, I don't know if that's 5 years out, I don't know how many years out, but if that tipping point is reached, then the most likely change to the database model would be a drastic one, rather than a revolution rather than evolution, I guess. I do have sort of one last slide, and I want to thank Against the Grain and their big deal issue that came out in February, I think. I sort of read all of the big deal related articles one evening and said, well, I really need to boil this down and figure out what we're doing and what things matter when you're describing your models. So these are Skelk pricing models. This is not publisher-wide pricing models, right? Different publishers have different things that they offer to different consortia. So this may not reflect your situation. But we at this point have three what I would consider to be of database models without any hedging. Those are the cases where subscribe title money does not transfer in, but subscribe title money does also not transfer out. So the box in the middle there for us, Springer Nature, University of Chicago Press, and Wiley are the three that fit squarely within that box. And then we have a couple others that are on the edges of that. So our Sage Premier model, and they do offer this model to most libraries, does track titles going in, but does not track titles going out. So it's kind of a modified database model, and that could be a bad thing, but at least up to now, there's not a lot of titles going out of Sage, so that has not been an issue. And then on the other side, and I hesitate slightly to do this in a panel that Wiley put together, but I will say that Elsevier has a reputation for having, for squeezing a lot out of libraries. Their model for us is about as economically advantageous as you could be. So without going into what the percentage increase is, they don't track subscribed titles in. You have an option. You can bring it in or you can not bring it in. And they do allow subscribed titles that they keep in track from before to go out and the money to go out. So in essence, we kind of have three that are core database model types, and we have two that are in that area. Would I like to see these other three that are on the board here move in the direction of a database model? For us, that would be better. But if that does not work for them, then we won't go there. So I think it's really thinking about what those possibilities are. And so those are the kinds of things we take into account. I haven't covered the rest of it, but one of the things I think about, which we haven't talked about at all with database models, is that it also includes post-cancellation access to all of the content. So the Elsevier Freedom Collection typically does not, so that kind of pushes them out of really being a core all-inclusive or database model, and the same is the case with TNF. So anyway, that's the world that we are looking at. We like to see it shift in the direction it has. Wiley was a big one to move to the database model, but we've been proponents of it for a long time, and though it has some drawbacks, our libraries generally are happier with us if we can move in that direction.
So we've got just over 5 minutes left, and we'd like to open the floor to anyone in the audience who'd like to ask our panel some questions. We've got a microphone sitting in the middle, or we can probably get a microphone to you. Here we go.
Hi, this question is about one of your slides. When you had the libraries and Skelk ranked from biggest to smallest, can you speak to the negative numbers?
Yeah. So the negative numbers are cases where after 3 years, the library's price was still lower than the initial price. And that is an aberration I can't explain in looking at the data. I know they were in it the whole time. I know they should have had the same content. We did have in the past, which we don't have with the database model, a consortia-wide cancellation clause, which allowed individual libraries who were under financial pressure to cancel potentially a bigger portion of their own individual subscription set, which was still kind of being tracked at that point. And as long as the consortium spend stayed up. So at that point, the reason I think we saw some libraries doing better under the old model is because some libraries either were forced to or took the time to take advantage of that cancellation clause. And so, you know, it is in a world where library budgets are staying close enough in their increases to what the cost of the model increases is, that's not as important. And we did a lot of going back and forth with this and other models on our people, and basically most of them said, nah, we don't use it. And so the benefit for a greater number of the libraries was to even it out a bit. But that does mean that we had some libraries which might have been needed to pull out of the package, being able to get some relief under the terms of that contract. We lack those now. So one of the things we're going to find out as we go forward is if a library comes and says this, you know, how flexible can we be? What can happen in working with Wiley to address that? But yeah, that's probably the main explanation.
Right. So there was me thinking we were finishing at 1:15. It's actually 10 past, so we can just take one more.
Sorry. Just wanted to ask, did you mention that the Wiley package has post-cancellation access, I think? Yes? Okay. Thank you.
I mean, as librarians. Post-cancellation access? Yes. Yes, perpetual access for the years subscribed.
To the whole collection. And that now is the norm. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. So I'd like to personally thank Wendy, Corey, Jason, Grace, Mary for not only their preparation but also their insight today. And thank everyone for coming today. And a big hand for our panel.